2 Samuel, the 18th chapter. Who has rebelled against David? Yes, a young man by the name of Absalom, who is David's son. And he had a little help by the name of a man by the name of what? Ahithophel, who was David's what? Counselor. And he turned on David, sided with Absalom. They overthrew David, and David had to flee from the city, didn't he? And one man was left in the city of Jerusalem to overthrow the counsel of Absalom. What was his name? A man by the name of Cushi. Hushai. And was Cushi successful in that endeavor? Yes, he was successful. And when Ahithophel learned that Hushi's counsel had been followed rather than his, what did he do? Yes, he went out, and I find it interesting that he hanged himself because he is a type of whom? He is a type of Judas. Okay, he is a Old Testament picture of Judas in the New Testament, who also betrayed a king, didn't he? Judas betrayed the King of Israel, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So very interesting that both of those men hung themselves, didn't they? And just a good story. So the counsel of Cushi was, let David reside in a city and then do what? Yes, and then we'll take Israel and we'll attack him in that city and we'll kill him in the city and everything will be wonderful. David is in a little town by the name of Mahanaim, and now Absalom and his forces are on the move. True or false? Absalom went out into the battle against David. True. Something horrible happened to poor Absalom. What was it? Yes, he got his head caught in a tree, didn't he? I'd love to have seen that, wouldn't you? Okay. You hear about those kind of things happening all the time, you know. Even if he wasn't a enemy of David, it's still been fun just to go out there and watch. Just, how'd you do that, you know? Caught up there under his neck or something. And a young man saw Absalom and immediately slays him. True or false? False. He does not. Why doesn't he? Yes, he's the king's son. And he had heard the king tell the commanders of Israel to deal gently with my son Absalom. And so he refused to kill Absalom when he was hung in the tree. He goes back, he reports that to Joab, and Joab deals gently with Absalom and takes him back to Jerusalem for trial. False? What happens? Joab goes out and shoots 3 darts through his heart, doesn't he? He also has 10 men who are his armor bearer. Wouldn't you like to have seen the armor? If it takes 10 men to deal with your armor, wouldn't you like to have seen that? 10 men dealing with his armor who also did what? Slew Absalom. Okay? I bet he was a bloody mess by the time they finished with Absalom. Okay? So that kind of got to where we were last week, the death of Absalom. And what's happened to Israel? What did they do? Yes, they all fled and went back to their tents, didn't they? And so that's where we were at the end of our study last week. The title of today's lesson I have on your sheet is this: The Report of Absalom's Death to David. Do you think David would want to know about the battle? Do you think David would want to know about his son? Oh yes, he'd want to know about his son. Who has a good outline for us? Anybody? Got an outline? Nobody? Here goes Jim again. Point number 1, Jim. Okay, Ahimaaz is forbidden to run a message. Okay, Cushi takes the message, and then Ahimaaz outruns him. Next point, 3. Okay, Ahimaaz outruns Cushi. Number 4. Okay, Ahimaaz does not know about Absalom, doesn't he? Okay, at least he says that anyway. Let's go to the next point. Okay, Cushi tells him that he's like all his enemies. And then what's the last one? David grieves over Absalom. Wow. Very interesting study. 6 points that I have divided this chapter into, and then I'll let you go and do the title of each one of those sections. Let's just go through our questions, and we'll talk about the chapter as we go through. Question number 2, who was the first who wanted to tell the king that the Lord had avenged him of his enemies? Ahimaaz, yes, Ahimaaz. The Bible says, then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, let me run and bear the king's tidings, how that the Lord avenged him of his enemies. Ahimaaz, as we continue to read the chapter, appears to have been a very good runner. Okay, a very good runner. Are there some individuals who just have certain skills about them? Oh yes, for some reason, take for instance Vic, one of the greatest basketball players that's ever existed. You didn't know that standing in front of you here, did you? Who would have known? What are you laughing at over here? No, I don't have skills in basketball. Not good skills. I can play a little bit, okay, but I just don't have that skill. You get a guy like Michael Jordan, someone like that, guess what? Man, unbelievable. Well, Ahimaaz apparently had a wonderful skill, wonderful ability at running. And in the days of David, were there a lot of occupations for runners? Oh, yes. A lot of occupations for runners. Glenn, am I home? Just want to make certain. Yes. What kind of occupations? Okay, yes, especially that. Deliver messages for kings, for individuals in authority. Okay, that would be one occupation. Maybe it's just deliver a message for any individual in the nation, right? Okay, just anybody who needs a message taken from one place to another. And so these men were very, very important individuals. Folks, running was also an extremely popular sport. Okay, and always has been. Okay, you go into the New Testament. Does Paul use running as part of an illustration of the Christian life? Yes, the Bible uses running as part of the illustration of a Christian life. So running's been important for a long, long time. Ahimaaz is the son of who? Zadok. Who is Zadok? Yes, he's the high priest, one of the high priests in the nation of Israel. So he's the high priest's son, and we need to remember that. Okay, very, very important. Now that the enemy was defeated and the kingdom was safe, he wanted to be the first to report the news to whom? To David. Now there's 2 words in that verse that are very, very interesting. Number 1, bear tidings. Okay, bear tidings. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, let me run and bear the king tidings. That was written in the Hebrew language originally. If you were to bring that over into the Greek language, the Greek word would be evangelism. Okay? Let me bring the king what? Good tidings. Isn't that what evangelism is? It's the bearing of good tidings to lost humanity. Okay, so is this a good day for Israel? Oh yes, this is a great day for Israel. And so, he says the second word there is that little word avenged. Okay, that word means to be judged, to be condemned, to be punished. David, the one who's risen in rebellion against you. David, the one who has defied your authority, who's overthrown your kingdom. Guess what? He's been punished and condemned. That ought to be wonderful news to a king, shouldn't it? Especially a king who's been driven from his throne, a king who is now living in a town called Mahanaim instead of the holy city of God. Folks, this ought to be wonderful news. True or false? Joab approved of Ahimaaz telling David about the victory. False. And Joab said unto him, thou shalt not bear tidings this day, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. But this day thou shalt not bear tidings. You think that deflated Ahimaaz just a little bit? He knows he's fast. He knows he can run. He knows he can get to David. There's victory. I want to tell the king the good news. And guess what? Joab won't let me do it. Folks, that's deflating, isn't it? But now notice, why didn't he want Ahimaaz to go to David and tell him the news? I want you to listen to the text again, okay? And Joab said unto him, okay? I want you to keep that in mind. This is what he said to him. Thou shalt not bear tidings this day, thou shalt bear tidings another day, but this day thou shalt not bear tidings, because the king's son is dead. He has specifically told Ahimaaz exactly what the state of Absalom is. The king's son is what? Dead. You can't go to David and tell him that. Why? Why couldn't he? Okay? But in just a minute, he's going to turn to another guy, and guess what he's going to say? Hey, Cushi, come here. Take that message to David. What? Whoa, wait a minute. I just asked you if I could go, and you said no. And then you turn right over here to Cushi, and you let him go. So why would he let Cushi, and why would he not let Ahimaaz? That's the question. Oh, folks, who did we just say Ahimaaz is? He is the son of the who? High priest. You want to know what Joab doesn't know? Joab doesn't know how David's going to react to this kind of news. For David, this is not what? This is not evangelism, is it? This is not good news. For David, this is what? Some of the worst news that he is ever going to experience. Can you imagine running up to the king, telling him that his son's dead? They already know David's emotionally distraught over this, isn't he? He's already warned them, you deal gently with my son Absalom. Don't you kill him. Don't take his life. You make certain you spare him. And now you go up to David and you tell him, great news, Kingy. Guess what? Your son's dead. Nobody knows how David's going to respond. Do people who hear certain news often respond negatively to that news? Even if the news is good news, some people will respond negatively to the news, won't they? It's not good news. Not to them. It's bad news. And so they destroy the messenger because of the message. And Joab had no clue how David would respond. Okay? Larry?
The first question probably would have been, how did he die? And Joab probably had some reservations about that.
Well, either way he went on that one, his name was going to be told, wouldn't it? Okay? Who did David ask to report the news? Cushi, yes. Then said Joab to Cushi, go tell the king what thou hast seen. There is disagreement as to whether this is his name or whether this is his cultural background, a Cushite. Okay? There were Cushites who were brought into the servitude of the kingdom, and it's very well possible that this man could have been a Cushite who was a servant of Joab. Now think about that. You don't send who? You don't send the high priest's son. You just send a what? Just send a servant to tell the news. Okay? The servant didn't have any skin in the game other than to do what? Just to report the news, right? That's all he was. But when you get a man like Ahimaaz in a high position reporting that kind of same news, a man reacts differently sometime than he will just to a lowly servant. Okay? You can go back and do some study on whether it was a Cushite or whether it was Cushi. It really doesn't matter, does it? It was a different individual that Joab chose to take the message. How did he travel to get to David? And he ran, yes. Didn't travel by mule. I guess they never found Absalom's mule. I don't know what happened to that mule. Okay, the Bible says what? He just ran away, got stuck up on, left him under that tree and just ran away. Mary Lou says, smart mule. Probably so. After Cushi was sent to David, Ahimaaz still wanted to take a message to David. True or false? True. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, yet again to Joab, but howsoever. That's kind of like I was saying, what? What are you doing? Howsoever, let me, I pray thee, run also after who? Cushi. Now, folks, usually a person who runs, who gets the first jump, usually has the best advantage, right? Well, guess what Ahimaaz is not worried about? He is not worried about Cushi beating him. Okay? Ahimaaz is a sprinter, folks, of top-notch quality. And he still wants to take the message, doesn't he? I just wrote down here, it must have been a great honor to take news of a victory to a king. Wouldn't you think that? Ahimaaz deeply desired to please the king with such words. True or false? Joab continued to discourage Ahimaaz from reporting the news to David. And Joab said, wherefore wilt thou run, my son, seeing that thou hast no tidings ready? What did he just tell him? Why do you want to run? You don't have any good news to tell. Now, why did Joab say that? Because he knew David. That's why. Who was Joab? He was the commander of David's forces. Folks, Joab had been in David's presence many, many, many years. He knew David like a book, if anybody did, didn't he? And he understood David's weakness. And guess what one of David's weaknesses was? His children, wasn't it? He was always tender and forgiving and compassionate toward his kids, regardless of what they did. They could do almost anything. And he was okay with it, or it didn't bother him a whole lot. Okay? And so, very, very forgiving individual. If you take this message to David, it's not good news, it's what? It's bad news. You don't have what? You don't have tidings to bear. Why in the world do you want to run? How did Ahimaaz travel to David? Notice what Ahimaaz... See, David's forbidden him the second time, hadn't he? He's discouraged him the second time. But notice what he says. But howsoever, let me run. Remember that little word, importunity, in our lesson last week about prayer? Anybody remember what it means? Importunity. It's in the Bible. Yes, to do it over and over and over and over and over. Just keep asking, and eventually what? Whoever you're asking gets tired and what? Yields to your desire. Here Ahimaaz is, let me run. No, let me run. No, let me run. Okay. You get sick of it, don't you? Just shut here. Take the sucker and run, Goodness. So he tells him to go ahead and run. Okay, so he's also on the run now, didn't he? Go to number 10. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the blank and overran Cushi. Ran by the way of the what? Plain. Folks, listen to me. There's always more than one way to get somewhere. Right? There's always more than one way to get somewhere. Now, if you go and do some study of the Transjordan region, okay, does anybody know what side of the Jordan that's on? I just pointed it out, in case you didn't know. It's on the east side of the Jordan. Okay, it's where the 2.5 tribes settled during the days of Joshua. Okay, and that's where that battle was probably fought. It's very rough, rugged terrain in that area. But if you come toward the west and you get on the edge of the Jordan River, guess what that is? That is a flat, dry place to run. So it sounds as though Cushi took one route, the hard, difficult, hilly terrain, and we have Ahimaaz who says, "Nuh-uh, I'm going to take the what? I'm going to take the plain of the Jordan, the plain of the wilderness, and I'll get there a lot quicker than he just because of the route that I'm taking. So very, very interesting. He overran Cushi. Okay, that just means he what? Passed him. He didn't tackle him or anything. Okay, he just outran him. Who sat between the two gates? And David sat between the two gates. That's weird, isn't it? Sat between the two gates. Now, most big cities like Jerusalem have many gates around them, okay? There was usually at least one gate on each city wall, okay? So there's at least 4 gates. Depending upon how big the city was, there was usually even more gates than that, okay? Some would have 8, 10, 12 gates, depending on how big the city was. Because, you know, when you get to the back of a city, you didn't want to have to go all the way around to the front to get through, okay? So depending upon which direction you come. But notice that the Bible says David is sitting what? Between 2 gates. Now does that mean he was on the outside of the wall between 2 gates on one side of the wall? Or what does it mean? Main entrances into cities usually contain 2 gates. Okay? There was a front gate, then there was a courtyard, and then there was a second gate. Okay? A second gate. That courtyard was a very, very important place. It was a place where the wise men congregated. It was the place where they conducted official business. Okay? Do we ever read of things like that happening in the Bible? Oh yes, all the time. You read about them meeting at the gates. Remember in the days of Boaz and the days of Esther, he said he had to go where? Have to go meet him at the gate. Okay, because he knew when he came through, there's the courtyard there, they can transact business there. And so it was in between those 2 gates, in that court where David was sitting. Why was he sitting there? Waiting for a message, folks. Okay? This battle to David is of vital importance. Not from the standpoint of his kingdom, but from the standpoint of who? Of his son. Okay? So he's sitting there between those 2 gates. Remember, David was also told to do what? You stay in the city so that you can what? Succor the armies. Remember? What's that little word succor mean? Help. Okay? Help the army. So David was in a position in between those 2 gates to help in any way possible. If he needed to make a decision about his army, about the battle, about sending someone somewhere, he could do it in a heartbeat, folks. Okay? So David was in a good position in the city. What did the watchman see from the roof over the gate? Yes, and the watchman went up to the roof, over the gate, unto the wall, and lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running alone. Don't ever just, don't leave off all the words, folks, okay? He saw a man running, but he sees the first man running what? Alone. Unless you were on official business, you were crazy to be outside of a city alone. Okay? So this is the very reason that David knows what's going on. Okay? The man's what? The man's alone. All right? So this man must be what? This man must be on official what? Business of some sort. Okay? You just did not go outside of city walls alone. Why? It's dangerous, folks. Okay? Criminals, thieves, the enemy. You don't know who you're going to run into outside the city walls. So you didn't ever go out there alone. When the king was told about a runner, what did David say? Yes. And the watchman cried and told the king. And the king said, if he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth. And he came apace and drew near. You see, David said, if he's alone, he must be what? He must be from the battlefield. Okay? He must be on a mission to come to the city. So David picked up on that immediately. True or false? The watchman saw another man running. True. Wouldn't you like to have seen how far ahead Ahimaaz was of Cushi? I just want to know something about his running skills, you know. Huh? Someone was chasing him, that's true. And the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called unto the porter and said, Behold, another man running along. Now, the first time it sounds like the watchman just yelled down to David, doesn't it? The second time it says that he yelled down to who? The porter. Who's the porter? Who is it? Yeah, he's the gatekeeper, folks. Okay, you got a man up top, he's the watchman. And then you've got a man who's down at the door that's going to have the ability to open and shut the door, right? So he calls down to the porter, and the porter reports the message to David. Okay. What did David say about this second runner? He also bringeth tidings. Okay. Why did he say that? Because he too is what? Alone. All right? Let me ask you something. Can battles very quickly change as far as what's transpiring? Oh yes, they can change in a heartbeat. Okay? So something happens, you send a runner, right? Something else transpires just in a course of minutes, maybe half an hour, and all of a sudden you've got to do what? Send another messenger. All right, so, but it's just interesting that David, because both of them are alone, believes both of them are bringing what? Good tidings. Who did the watchman believe the first runner to be? Ahimaaz. And the watchman said, I love the way this says, methinketh. Don't you like that? Methinketh. That's the way I talk sometime. Methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. He could look. Can you see off a wall several miles if it's open enough? Oh yeah, folks. It's not anything to see a mile, 2 miles. I think from where Ocean 1 is, on the beach down here, all the way down to the pier is about 2, maybe a little over 2 miles. And you can see that pier on a pretty day. Nothing to see that pier, is it? Nothing whatsoever. And so you can see a long way off. He just says, I think what? He didn't say this is Ahimaaz, but he said what? I think by the running of this man that it's who? Ahimaaz. By his gait, by his stride, he thought what? This has got to be Ahimaaz. You see, he was just what? A talented runner. Okay? A very talented runner. Do you remember when the prodigal son was coming home? And what does the text say? And his father seeth him afar off, and ran and fell upon his neck and kissed him. Okay? But he saw him what? Afar off. But he knew it was who? I know it was my son. How did he know? By the way he walked. Okay? Folks, parents know their kids, don't they? You know? You know how they walk, you know their gait, you know their stride. And the very moment he saw him, far off, that's my boy. And it's the same way with this man. I've seen Ahimaaz run 1,000,000 times. And by the way he's running, guess what? That's got to be Ahimaaz. Was David glad that that's who it was? Oh yes, he's glad about that, folks. Okay? And the king said, He is a blank man and cometh with blank tidings. He is a good man and cometh with good tidings. Had he sided with David in this battle? Had Ahimaaz sided with David in the battle? He's whose son? He's Zadok's son. And remember, it was Ahimaaz and Jonathan who were in Enrogel, who took the message of Cushi to David and said, what? You need to get across the river. Okay? They were a part of David's inside team against Absalom. Okay? I find it interesting that the two words, he's a good man and he has what? Good tidings. That word good is the same to describe both. Okay? Exact same word describing boast. Ahimaaz, valuable in estimation, kind, right, moral. Tidings, pleasant, agreeable, excellent. Little did David what? Little did David know. Okay? He's a good man. He's got good tidings. What were Ahimaaz's first words to David? Are you ready for this? Shalom! That is the actual word in the Hebrew text that he yells out to David. Shalom, peace, all is well. Okay? That's the way it's translated in the King James Version. I wrote this down. Absalom was dead. David could now assume the throne again. One would think that peace had been restored to the nation and that all is what? All is well. That's what Ahimaaz announces. All is well. What position did he take before the king? Yes, fell on his face before the king. Folks, a position of what? Humility, reverence, respect, awe for the position of king. Okay? I just find it interesting that there are, in the Bible, when you have positions of authority, those who are under positions of authority show reverence and honor and respect toward them. And today, we act like we don't have to do that anymore. Okay? Respect and honor and reverence just is almost out the door. Okay? It's just unbelievable. What report did Ahimaaz give to the king regarding the battle? This is interesting stuff right here. What was his report? Yes, listen to him. Blessed be the Lord thy God. I find that's interesting. They say, who's involved in the battle here, folks? God. You see, those people had a different outlook on God sometime than we do. We've mentioned this before. Almost everything that happened in their lives, they knew who was involved. God was involved in that. We forget that sometime. Okay? And we need to remember that. Blessed be thy God. Now listen to what he says. Which hath delivered up the man that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. Does he say Absalom's dead? No. All he says is what? He's been delivered up. Had he been delivered up? Oh yes. On a platter. On a bow. He'd been delivered up. God's providential hand was at work. But I just find the words that he used very interesting. What question did David ask Ahimaaz? And the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? Absalom. Everything for David is about who? Absalom. Everything is about... They're going to battle. Take care of Absalom. They come back from battle. How's Absalom? He probably wrote Absalom letters while he was in Mahanaim. Hope everything's good at the kingdom, Absalom. I didn't say the Bible says that. I'm just making a joke, folks. Watch this. David's mind is not on the rebellion. David's mind is not on his forces fighting in the field. David's mind is not on retaining his kingdom. David's mind is not even on the Lord's deliverance. Isn't that who he said has delivered him? God's delivered you. His mind's not on any of that. His mind's focused on one thing and one thing only. Is the young man safe? Here's what's interesting. Job knew that was whose mindset? David's mindset. He knew that. That's why he did not want who going. He didn't want Ahimaaz going. You're going to get questioned about Absalom, and guess what? You've got no good news about this boy. Is the young man okay? Unbelievable. True or false? Ahimaaz told David that Absalom was dead. False. Listen to this. And Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant, and me thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. Folks, is that just a lie? That's just a lie right there. Remember a while ago? I emphasize the point. Joab said unto him, Ahimaaz, you don't have any good news to bear because the king's son is what? Dead. He knew. He knew. But guess what he wasn't going to do? He didn't have the guts to tell him, did he? So what does he do? I don't know. When I left, there's a big tumult happening, and I don't know. Well, guess what? David's no longer interested in this man, is he? What did David say to him? Oh, yes, turn aside and stand here. You know, you're useless. If you don't know anything about Absalom, you just turn aside. I can almost see him grabbing him. You just stand right there. Okay? And he turned aside and stood still. What were Cushi's first words to David? Tidings, my lord the king. There's that word again, tidings. Remember it means what? Good news, my lord the king. For the Lord hath avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. He's done what? He's avenged you. I looked up the word avenged, to judge, to pronounce sentence, to vindicate, to punish, to execute judgment, to condemn and punish. In his words, he let David know what? Absalom's gone. Okay? He's been punished. He's been condemned. He's been destroyed. Okay? And guess who did it? The Lord has avenged you of your enemies this day. Wow. But David still asks a question. What does he ask Cushi? Oh, is Absalom saved? Oh, man. How many times are you going to ask this? And Cushi answered, the enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as the young man is. Wow. It's pretty strong language. Did he tell him he was dead? Yep. In a roundabout way, didn't he? I wish every one of your enemies were just like Absalom, dead. Well, that's comforting news, isn't it? Thanks. Unbelievable. It's pretty strong words. It'd be rough. They could. And the king was blank, much moved, and went up to his chamber over the gate, and what? And wept. Much moved. To quiver. With any violent emotion, especially anger or fear. To tremble, quake, rage, quiver, be agitated, be excited, to be perturbed. Folks, this word is more than his being agitated over the death of his son. Oh yes, he's upset and he's trembling over that. But what else do you think he's upset about? My commanders did not follow my what? My orders about my son. Folks, David is upset. He was much moved, trembling. He's almost in a rage over what's transpired and that his son is dead. Who did David wish to have died rather than Absalom? Himself. Folks, when I was in preacher training school, this is one of the verses we had to memorize. Oh, my son, Absalom. My son, would God that I had died for thee. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Now here's what's interesting. Where has David gone while he's making this cry? What does the text say? He went up to the chamber, listen to it, over the gate of what? The gate of the city, and wept. When the forces of Israel returned, they would come through the gate. David was in the chamber, and what would they hear? Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Would God that I had died for thee. Absalom, my son, my son. How'd you like to hear that on the day of victory? You're a soldier in the army. You've just defeated the battle. And the one the king is weeping over is who? The enemy. That's the one he's crying over. Folks, that's where we pick up next week. Okay? Thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you, sir.